Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to another episode of the Ummah Times, where we help decolonize minds. We're your hosts, Ali and Zishan, and today we have the pleasure of having Brother Ibrahim Ludwick joining us in our studio, our virtual studio, to talk about money in Islam and his research work called The Islamic Economy in the Age of Bitcoin, the Rise of the Digital Ummah and the Internet of Trust. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Ibrahim.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله
Assalamu
وبركاته.
alaikum, brother.
And welcome to the show.
السلام. جزاكم الله خير. Thanks.
How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, it's doing very well.
That's great. That's great. Now, before we get into the meat of the discussion on the topic of money in Islam, and on your nearly 300-page volume work, we always like to get to know our guests a little more. And I understand that you embraced Islam around 8 years ago, and I believe our viewers and us as well will be interested in how that transpired. If you can be kind enough to kind of share that with us, that would be great.
It's not unfortunately it's not that straightforward because it was a very long process for me. I mean, some people have an epiphany and it's a sudden moment, and they enter Islam. For me, it was a very long, drawn out process. So it's difficult to describe it. There were many aspects to it, like spiritual aspects, emotional aspects, family, and also intellectual dimensions to that. Just to that realization, I'd call it like a realization. And I think, though, to condense it, what's most relevant for the discussion today is the intellectual part. And that was a major factor. I was studying in Germany, and I was studying the world financial system, and we were dealing with stuff like the management of financial crises. And I started studying right after right around the same time that the global financial crisis happened. This was triggered by the subprime mortgage crisis in the United States. And so I was just going through all these theories about how to prevent financial crisis, how to reduce the damage that was done by financial crisis. And there's literally libraries could be filled with the books that are written by authors on this, on how to manage this. And at some point, I encountered the Islamic banking paradigm and started researching that. And when I was studying a concept, there's a concept called seigniorage, and it has to do with the production of currency and something. And I was studying different currencies at that time. I was studying also local currencies and some anomalies that happened in the I guess it was in the Great Depression that was leading up to World War II. And I don't know, see, this is what I mean. It's a very long and drawn out topic. But suffice to say, when I encountered the Islamic paradigm, I read about zakat, and I realized, okay, this is it. Like, this is the best policy that I've encountered of anything in terms of managing an economy. And then the prohibition on riba, on interest. Also, I realized when I was studying the history of how the development of the world financial system, and specifically I was in Germany, so Germany is still traumatized from World War II, and I was studying in a city which was the main tank production for Germany. So it was like one of the most heavily bombed cities in all of Germany. And it was still, you could kind of, when you interacted with the people there, you could still feel that. And so I did a lot of thinking about what caused the war, and I realized what a central role interest banking practices played in leading up to the war. And when I went back further in history, I realized that this had been prohibited in Christianity before, and it was clearly prohibited also by the Bible.
No.
And yet the only people who were really abiding, or were really making a sincere attempt to abide by these prohibitions today, are Muslims.
Mm.
And that was like a major factor where I just realized, like, in terms of searching for an alternative to this broken system, it was really, of everything that I researched, this was the best solution that I found. So
Mhm.
yeah, it was kind of, and then if you see that, you kind of have to get behind it. You can't just say, oh, okay, here's a solution to these problems that I've been devoting all this time into researching, but I'm going to do something else because I like beer or something like that. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
like,
Yeah, so basically, what like the way you came to Islam and embraced it was you saw it as the system to replace whatever the flawed systems that humanity is subject to. So you came across it like that, and you just kind of put two and two together, and the rest was history. Is that? I mean, I know I put it in like a nutshell, but is that pretty
yeah,
much kind of like what happened, right? Because a lot
I
of
mean,
yeah.
yeah. Oh,
Go ahead, brother.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of other factors that contributed, but that was a major factor, and you see that with people from almost any academic discipline. That
Right.
if you talk to doctors, they'll talk about miracles, medical miracles in the Quran or something like that. If you talk to geologists, they'll talk about the description of different types of rocks in the Quran or something like that. Any discipline that someone's in, if somebody is sincerely seeking the truth, it will lead them to Islam.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think I just want to add there that I think that's the beauty of the Islam, right? Because a lot of times what has happened is that we try to limit Islam just to the ritual aspects of the deen, right? Whereas, Islam obviously is a system. So that's why anybody, because we all live, in a system, right? So we have economic system, geopolitics, right? Foreign policy, various other systems, sociology, right? And anybody who's interested in any of these, areas, Islam has something to offer to almost everyone, right? And I think that's the beauty of it. And that's, I think, how we need to basically, when we're doing the dawa as an example, portray Islam as a system, as a deen, as a complete way of life, versus, okay, we don't believe in Trinity, we believe in one God, and along those lines. So I think that proves the point.
Yeah, and that's what secularism tries to do, that to Islam. I mean,
Right.
I believe unsuccessfully,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah. And we can see the fruits of it already, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, before we delve in,
Jazakallah, and of course, there was other like the other pieces to your life that kind of brought you in the full embracement of Islam. We're not going to cover that in detail, but I think we got the gist of it. How it's just natural, right? If a human being is true to oneself and try to keeps like desires at bay, it's just a natural, it's natural as 1+1, I would argue. Right.
Yeah, I mean, Allah doesn't wrong anybody. I mean, Allah is not unjust with anyone. So nobody is going to be, punished without being given the many opportunities, really, many opportunities. So, yeah.
Yeah. Jazakallah khair for that, brother. Ali, you can take it away.
Yeah. I mean, before we, delve, really deep into the conversation about the cryptocurrency, I mean, could you just let us know, like, briefly, that what led you to write, this 300-page, book just on, Islamic economic system and cryptocurrency?
Oh man, that's another story. SubhanAllah.
We have time.
I mean, really, it was okay. Alhamdulillah. It was kind of the same thing. So I mean, I learned about Bitcoin around the time I was finishing my studies, and I was kind of like, okay, I had dreamed before about working for the United Nations. When I started out my studies, that was like my motivation letters. I really would like to work for the United Nations, and then by the end, I was like, oh no, I'm not working for the United Nations. Okay. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? And I learned about Bitcoin at that time, and I was like, wow, okay. The idea of moving money anywhere without, it being controlled by nation states or by these financial institutions. And I learned about these financial institutions doing all of these, I don't know, like financing both sides of World War II in the run up to it and stuff like that. Just really, I don't know, you don't have to know a lot about bankers to know that they're bad news, and I just thought, wow, anything that reduces their power is probably going to be a net benefit, and I just got really excited about I don't really remember what happened, but it's just, as I started learning about it, it's like something clicks and it turns into an obsession. It's like a fever or something, you know, you get like, yeah, it's an obsession. I couldn't read about anything else for maybe like 5 weeks. And then I started writing about it, and I had just become Muslim around that time. And I got on the forums on the internet and started chatting with people. And I thought maybe there's other Muslims who are into Bitcoin. And I found some other Muslims who were into Bitcoin, and they started something they called Islamic Bank of Bitcoin. And so I started, talking with them and talking about, okay, can I get involved with this? And and I don't know. It's just I was just looking for something to do. I mean, I didn't really know what I was going to do in terms of work. I had some ideas. Eventually I ended up starting a business, and it didn't work out that well. That was my first business, and and I was just doing this stuff on the side, reading about Bitcoin. I just felt very enthusiastic about it, because it felt in the same way that I felt like that Islam was giving me an outlet to do something productive. Before that, I'd been very critical of, I don't know, American society, a lot of the social problems, like prison industrial complex in America, stuff like that really bothered me, the injustice in America. And I was very critical of the system. And when I found Islam, I felt like I could be constructive. I could put my energy towards building something rather than trying to tear something down. And I don't know. I mean, I guess Bitcoin, it's an alternative. It's an alternative system. And I think that, so it was that same kind of enthusiasm and wanting to get out of this, this kind of like what seemed like a corrupt, and still seems like a very corrupt and destructive system. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, before we talk about the Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, could you just maybe take a step back and, for the benefit of our viewers, define money from an Islamic perspective, and then we can talk about how the cryptocurrency or Bitcoin for our topic of discussion that fits into the definition of money in Islam.
I've read papers where the Islamic definition of money is discussed before. And I've read papers by scholars who, they seem to have a very clear idea of what the Islamic definition of money is. But at the same time, I've seen that there's different viewpoints, and I've also read summaries of the different views. And it's actually quite, it's kind of broad. At the most basic level, it would be considered like a means of exchange. Something that is used as, there's the 3 dimensions of money that are usually talked about, is the unit of account, which is measuring value in something, a means of exchange, which facilitates trade, and a store of value. And ideally, money has all 3 of those attributes, right? It's can be a good means of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. But that's not a restrictive definition. If you try to go back to like the Quran and Sunnah really literally and look for that definition, I think many scholars arrived at slightly different conclusions about what money can be or should be.
Okay, because usually, there's a belief that money in Islam usually has something, obviously store of value is one of them, unit of account, and ease of transferability, right? At the same time, money itself has to have an intrinsic value, right? So commodities in the Islamic history have been used as medium of exchange or as money, right? And at the same time, when we talk about we'll talk about the cryptocurrency, exactly what that is, because it's a really confusing concept, for a lot of people. Even we don't understand that completely, how that really works. So we'll talk about that. So that's also something to keep in mind as well, that store of value and something with the intrinsic value. It's key elements of money in Islam. You would agree to that, right?
As far as the intrinsic value, there's a lot of people who say that. And the issue with intrinsic value, the argument that's brought against it, and I've actually seen this used by, I guess I'd say, government scholars sometimes, which is that when they're trying to defend the paper money system, they they refer to this incident with Umar Khattab radiallahu anhu when he was talking about the currency system, and he got the idea of making a leather-based currency, which would be a representative value. That's not an intrinsic value. It means it would represent a value other than the value of the leather itself. And decided against there would be any, anything against that in Sharia, but decided against it because he was worried it would lead to, or he and his advisors were worried it would lead to unnecessary slaughtering of camels and wasteful slaughtering of camels for the production of leather. So that's usually that piece of evidence in the discussions, Islamic discussions about money, is often brought as evidence that intrinsic value does not need to be a fundamental property of money, that it can have just a symbolic value.
Okay. And for our viewers, could you just maybe, explain a little bit about cryptocurrency, what that really is, how that functions, and how does Bitcoin fit into it? Because, we have various other cryptocurrencies out there, like, Ethereum, you name it. I think they could be probably in hundreds by now, right? So I know it's a complex topic, just kind of dumb it down for our viewers, if that's okay with you.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a story that I really like about this topic. It's not really a story. It's a practice of a tribe in the South Pacific, in an island. I don't know where this is, in Vanuatu or Polynesia, one of these islands in the South Pacific. There was a tribe that used a type of stone for money. And it was kind of a rare stone. It was not a easy to find stone. It has a kind of beautiful, similar to gold. It was a beautiful stone, but it was very heavy. They got these big, huge stones. Some of them weighed maybe 400, 500 kilos. It would take maybe 6 or 8 men, strong men, to carry one, right? And so they used these as money. Right, but they would carry them to a village and they'd put it in the middle of the village. But it was so much trouble to move it that they just left it in the village square. And then they would anytime somebody was buying something, or they would use it for marriage, as a bride, dowry type thing. And anytime that it changed hands, anytime they purchased something, they wouldn't actually physically move the ownership of it, but they would just say, okay, this now belongs to Fulan. This guy is now the owner of the stone. And the whole tribe would just agree on that. Okay, yep, everybody agrees, he owns it now. And they just leave it in the same spot, right? And this actually, so sometimes when they were transporting these stones between islands, they would drop one by accident in the ocean. And then everybody would agree, okay, well, it still exists, so we can still use it for buying and selling, but it's in the ocean, right? So the point of that story is that what's really happening with money is a transfer of information, right? So you can do that within a tribe. You can transfer information about who owns what, and that's what banks do too. If they move money from one account to another, they're just they are safeguarding the information and saying, okay, Zishan is moving this much money to Ibrahim's account, Ibrahim's moving this much money to Zishan's account, and they're just writing that down in their computer. So it's just a change of information. It's just like taking notes or something like that. When it comes to cryptocurrency, well, you need the bank to safeguard that, because if anybody can log into the bank's computer and change the entries in it, then that would obviously be a problem, because you just add some zeros onto your account and enrich yourself, right? And that's actually what bankers do. That's what they do, because they have that power, right? So so cryptocurrency is just a means of securing the information about who owns what without having to trust anybody to safeguard it. You don't have to trust any single person there's nobody who has the power to change how much money is in your account, except for whoever holds the key, which ideally that would be only you. Only the account holder has the key, and only the key holder can change what is written in that entry, and cannot change it any more than what the network agrees on. You can't just add money into your account because the whole network already knows what is in your account, in the same way that a tribe knows who owns the stone, right? But it just enables that same dynamic that can happen in a single tribe for the whole world.
So basically, okay, so Jazakallah khair for that. So basically what you're saying is that you've taken the conventional or traditional safe holder of banks, you've taken them out of the picture. Basically, that's what's happening, and the safe holding of money it's become independent of these centralized structures such as banks, etc. So it's not. So Bitcoin so it allows transfer of ownership independently, but of money that has intrinsic value. Correct? Is that what we're talking about here? Like, so for example,
I would argue that it hasn't. Yeah.
So for example, like say you have either a $5 bill or I don't know, whatever, 5 pieces of gold, and you want to transfer ownership of that to me, you would use this Bitcoin method of transferring ownership independently of the banks. Is that what you're like? I mean, this is a very crude way I'm kind of explaining it, but is that what's happening? Or
yeah, you can say that in the same way that, like, if I send you money by PayPal or or bank transfer, what if they have now Venmo, something like that? They have a computer ledger with whoever has so much money, and they just adjust the number and add more money to your account, or add however the transfer is taking place. Yeah, so it's the same thing basically. It's just you don't need a custodian for it because it's secured by this like cryptography, which is basically these codes that prevent you from, in the same way that you're, for example, if you use encrypted chat. I mean, WhatsApp is supposedly encrypted, but Telegram or something like that. You don't want third parties reading your messages, and so they're coded, right? And you can't read them unless you have the key. It's the same basic concept. Yeah.
I think just to clarify as well, I think for the benefit of our viewers, when we're talking about Bitcoin, you're referring to Bitcoin as a currency. When we talk about, and how it works, similar to, as an example, like PayPal or Venmo or different other mediums, whereas you can't, let's say, use Bitcoin itself as a technology to transfer other assets such as gold or other paper currency, right? But Bitcoin itself is a currency.
You could. Like, for example, before Bitcoin was developed, some people tried to invent a gold-based currency. And now there's been a number of people who've tried to say, we're going to create gold-backed currencies, which are Sharia compliant because it's based on gold. This is not correct. And this was tried before and it failed because you can trade like a certificate of ownership of gold. And that's how paper money started out in the first place. We're saying, okay, we're not actually this paper, you can exchange it for such and such an amount of gold anytime, right? Okay. But then the people who were in charge of taking care of the gold spent it. I mean, that happened many times in history. So, yeah, sorry, what was the question?
If the Bitcoin itself is if the Bitcoin itself is a currency, or basically it's just another platform where it can serve as a currency and also at the same time can serve as an exchange platform.
I think it's a very important point, and that's where it's very easy to get confused. That's one of the major obstacles to understanding Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies in general, is that they don't fit into categories that existed before. So it's kind of a new thing, and it's in a class of its own. So if you try to say, is it an asset? Well, yes, it's an asset, but it's not really. Is it a currency? Well, yes, it's a currency, but not really. Is it a network? Yes, it's a network, but that's not the whole picture. So it doesn't really fit totally into any one of these categories. It kind of overlaps multiple categories. There is a currency component to it. There is a communication protocol component to it. There is an asset component to it. There's all of that is present.
So you're saying okay. So yeah, I need clarity on this. So Bitcoin is also a type of currency. So I could have a certain value of Bitcoin that I can transfer to you. Is that how it works? Like
Yeah. So I mean,
so the Bitcoin currency itself, is it does it have, like, how do you give it value to it?
the value of any item is usually determined by supply and demand. I mean, even if a government tries to set the price and fix a price, the price is still going to be determined by supply and demand. It's just the government is intervening into the supply and demand by restricting the behavior of producers or consumers. So, and Bitcoin is completely immune to any kind of intervention like that. So it's a total free market concept. I mean, to give you an idea of the relative value, this is a story I heard in Germany. They talked about at the end of the war, people could trade, I don't know, they talked about farmers would trade maybe like a few potatoes for like a fine gold watch. I mean, like, because, I mean, there was gold, but there was no food. So, I mean, people were, the value just completely shifted because how much people value food. There's a beautiful story about that from some, I can't remember, from somewhere from the scholars of Islam. They talked about, a king who, traded his whole kingdom for a sip of water. I don't know if you've ever heard that story before, but, when he was deprived of water.
Yeah.
You know the story I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So the value is relative.
Yeah. So how does like Bitcoin really fit into reviving the Islamic economics, right? If you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, I mean, I think that's why a topic of a lot of interest to me is Islamic institutions, and what institutions looked like at various times in the history of Khilafah, of the Ummah. And yeah, it's a very interesting topic. And, those we kind of take for granted that, I don't know how to say this. It's kind of difficult to build institutions without political authority.
Right.
If you do not have authority on the ground, it's, you're going to be influenced. And I don't know if you guys are involved in the masajid, and you're living in the US or
In Canada. We're in Canada.
In Canada, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're in Canada, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I was living in the US before, and I don't know if you've been involved with maybe the every masjid will have like a committee or a board, and that's making decisions, and there's a lot of politics involved in that a lot of times. And if you ever get involved in those type of situations, you can really feel there's like the legal environment really influences the decisions that are made and the operation, like what you can do and what you can't do.
Yeah, they're constrained. They're constrained. Yeah.
It's well, and it's not like that wasn't the case in the past in Islamic governments. There were also constraints from different rulers, and there were there's been politicization, different rulers trying to exert their political will through the masajid or through teaching religion. But generally speaking, if you want to build institutions, it's very, very, very difficult to do it without political authority on the ground. And that leads to kind of like a like a vicious cycle. Okay, well, we can't establish political authority because we don't have effective institutions, and we don't have effective institutions because we don't have political authority. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like chicken and egg problem essentially. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you
Right.
foresee? Because I know you talk about this in your book as well. So if you could just elaborate a little bit more on it, how do you foresee Bitcoin, serving as a revival tool for the Ummah right now, and how do you foresee them, utilizing it to basically revive some aspect of Islam? Because in the beginning of our conversation, we did talk about, Islam is a holistic system, right? So economics is just one aspect of it, right? So how do you foresee that happening?
Well, I mean, just in terms of organization, if you want to talk about building institutions and organization, finance is foundational to that in any situation. So, I mean, how you structure the finances and, yeah, yeah, and how because you need resources. I mean, you need resources to devote energy to anything, to dawah, to teaching, to community services. All of these things require researches and all of the resources, and these are all at the the base of the project of building an Islamic society, I think. And it's, for example, you've got the people talk a lot about the there's the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, the nations will gather around you like they're dividing up a feast, right? And they'll kind of cut the Muslim lands into portions. And, we kind of saw something similar to that description happening with the fall of the Uthmani Khilafah and, cutting up the countries into kind of this divide and conquer strategy, right? And so if you want to talk about unity and uniting the Muslims, how do we overcome this division which has been imposed on the Muslim lands? You have to look and see, well, how is this division maintained? Like, what exactly maintains that division? And currency is certainly one factor, because currencies are used to reinforce these divisions. They, the people feel like, okay, here I'm in Syria and I'm using the Syrian pound, and okay, now I'm going to Dubai or whatever, and I'm using dirhams, and this is like, and then there's symbols, like nationalistic symbols that are associated with the currency also. So this kind of like on a subconscious level drives this point that, okay, these are different nations, and it can kind of cultivate this sort of adversarial mentality of this, okay, this is a zero-sum game, which, what benefits us could harm other, we can be benefited from the harm of others, and, harming others can, that, you see what I'm saying? Algeria and Morocco being really good example, like where they were really uniform until the colonial period. And, and now they have very like adversarial mentality. And currency is not like, that's not all of it, but it is a part of it. It is a significant part of it.
Mm-hmm. So how would like the Bitcoin, how would so are you saying that like how does Bitcoin play in this, in the revive?
Okay, I mean, there's a lot of ways that it can. Let's say that. One of the examples that I gave is crowdfunding, for example. Let's say that you actually want to coordinate a group of Muslims who are in, I don't know, let's say 50 different countries, and you want to coordinate all their efforts. So, and we can see the power of crowdfunding already, for example, within individual areas. So, for example, North America, people do very, very amazing things with crowdfunding. I mean, helping people who are in need out, building masajid, building schools. Even I've seen brothers, use crowdfunding to finance their education, to like travel to Egypt and seek knowledge, or travel to Saudi and seek knowledge, stuff like this. So there's some major restrictions on that when you are using the legacy financial system. Some of it is just, if you ever try to do this too, I mean, I tried doing some import-export business, and the delays, there's huge delays. There's huge problems with paperwork and compliance. And it's very, very cumbersome to try to move, and especially if you want to move small amounts of money internationally. If you have a lot of money, okay, you can be effective. But let's say if you want to organize, I don't know, 50,000 people who are in 25 different countries and move all of their energy towards one focal point. I think a good example of visualizing that power just happened in this GameStop. Did you hear about this story last week or a couple of weeks ago about GameStop, right? This is, a bunch of people on the internet got together and took down a, Wall Street hedge fund by pooling their economic power, So this can really, this can really move things. It can move things in a negative way. That's a destructive example. But when you're talking about financing a business or a school somewhere, these are positive examples of where. Can you still hear me?
Yep,
Yeah.
we can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yes. So, and the thing is, especially, if you do anything like, even in terms of dawah, for example, there's a lot of restrictions on that. There's a lot of restrictions on what you can teach and what you can say, and getting financing. That's just one example. There's many examples, because literally everything you want to do in terms of institution building is going to require finances. And basically, when you're using the financial system, there's a kill switch on everything you do. So if you step out of line just a little bit, and the rules can always change, especially when you're in a democracy, they can just vote a new law in and restrict everything that you're doing, and and lead huge losses, really. Yeah.
So just for me, and I guess for the viewers to just understand this a little more, this is what I got from your take on this. So Bitcoin is a type of electronic currency, which is backed by the people. Am I correct so far? No? Yes?
No, it's backed by energy. It's backed by energy. Bitcoin specifically is backed by energy. Energy and math, basically.
Okay, well, is the Bitcoin currency is dependent on the technology, right? If the technology is there, but Bitcoin doesn't exist.
If the technology, if the internet stops, Bitcoin can continue to exist without the internet, but it would not be very useful, in my opinion.
Okay, but as you said, Bitcoin currency it's whatever you call it, energy or what have you. It's based on supply and demand of basically how the people, like the supply and demand based on how people's dependent on you gave the potato and gold analogy.
Yeah.
So it seems that you're saying that this Bitcoin currency would be allowable in an Islamic system, correct? Like that's what you're implying.
I don't try
ahead.
to venture into that. I don't try to make myself a mufti and I can give a fatwa on this. What I can say is that with my whatever understanding I have of paper money and the central banking system which is in place, I'm pretty confident that that's a lot worse in light of Sharia than Bitcoin. But I'm not going to go and say Bitcoin is 100% halal, free for all. I'm not necessarily going to say
it's more of like choosing between the least of two evils, and obviously Bitcoin has more. Obviously without taking into account the true Islamic nature of it, discounting that fact, that because more independent and it's less prone to external influence from different governments, because it kind of works independently of the government's influence. However, the internet aspect, because without internet, obviously there's no Bitcoin. But the governments, as we know now, they do have internet kill switches, as an example, right? So so basically, obviously, they're not going to be using those kill switches if the activity happening is not really a damaging to their status quo, right? But as soon as it becomes damaging to the status quo, they can very well use the kill switches, right?
Yeah, well, that's a martial law type situation where you have concentration camp type, things like that. So,
but how do you deal with the volatility aspect, right? Just a few months ago, it was around 10,000, 11,000 mark. And I was just looking at it, this morning, it's almost close to 40,000 per coin US. And plus, at the same time, also, if you could shed some light on the limitation of the coins, I believe it's 21 million, right?
Yeah.
And then it's 21 million. So you have a cap there of 21 million. So that means obviously the value of it will keep growing. right? And then we're gonna end up using fractions of the Bitcoin to conduct the transactions. As an example, if I want to go buy a milk from a convenience store and use Bitcoin, I'll probably use like 0.05% of one Bitcoin, right? So how do you deal with that? Because there's no and then also, if you could shed some light, why I talk about the volatility is the gharar aspect in Islamic economics, right? Because there's a lot of uncertainty, right? It's almost akin to gambling, right? Today it's $40,000 a coin. Just a few months ago it was 10,000. Tomorrow it could be 5,000, right? How do we deal with that?
I wrote a lot about that on the book, and I've written blog posts about that too. Really like grappling with this issue of gharar, because that is the strongest argument against it. And the way that I understand that too is, to me, it's not that uncertain, but that's probably because I spent a lot of time like trying to understand it and get what it really is. So it's not like a matter of chance to me, because I've never, since I kind of like started to get it, I haven't really ever had significant doubts that it's not going to continue gaining popularity as long as industrial civilization continues to exist and the internet continues more or less on the trajectory it is. As far as the internet breaking down, I mean, there's some some people who actually launched satellites into space which hold a copy of it, and they can communicate with satellite dishes, and you can broadcast transactions with ham radios also. So you can continue to transact in Bitcoin if the internet is shut down. So that's one of the first criticisms that they moved to address. So they set up infrastructure so that the Bitcoin network can function independently of the internet. But I don't believe it would be that useful at that point. It might be still, Allahu alam. But I would compare it to the stock market. Whereas if you go into the stock market and you don't really understand what you're doing, and you just think, okay, I see people are making money. I'm gonna pick a stock and I'll put $10,000 in it, and maybe I'm gonna get rich. Well, that's and that ties into the idea of maisir. And this is something really interesting that I stumbled on. Maisir, it refers to gambling, and it comes from the same root as yusra. Right, the same word used as inna ma'al usri yusra, like ease, and so it refers to something where you make money without really putting in any effort. You throw some money down, roll some dice, and your money doubles. Hey, and you can do that with the stock market. You could go into the stock market and you can say, I'm going to buy a random stock, and hey, look at that, I got rich, or oh hey, I just lost everything. And that can be kind of gambling. Or you can approach the stock market and you can say, okay, I'm going to research some stocks that have good fundamentals. They're companies that have proven earnings. They have assets on their balance sheet. I can look at their debt to revenue ratio, and I can calculate all this stuff up and say, okay, I'm going to try to hedge my position by buying different companies and try to get a balance and cover my risk, and try to shoot for 10 to 15% growth per year, something like that. And that's not really gharar at that point. That's investing. And when it comes to Bitcoin too, and cryptocurrencies, that's another point I try to bring up. When you buy it, you are investing. The people who get into these currencies early, and Bitcoin is by far the biggest one, but they have an interest in developing it. And that's the thing, is it has an incredible power to align diverse interests. So people who would normally never work together on anything can become kind of like united in their self-interest. Right? So that anybody who owns Bitcoin wants Bitcoin to succeed. So you have a lot of people they donate money to software developers who are working on the Bitcoin network, and so that. So when you buy the Bitcoin, you are increasing its price in the same way that when you buy a share of stock, you increase the price of that stock, and that then increases the total wealth that the people who are in charge of the stock, who own the bulk of the stock, who are like the founders of the company, right? And then they use that money to try to make the company successful. So,
right. But wouldn't it be fair to say that, well, from that perspective, then we're looking at Bitcoin as more of an investment vehicle, versus a medium of exchange. Because let's say, if you want to have a project where the Muslims, need to, they have an option to use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange to transfer money between different countries or crowdfunding, right? If we're basically trying to use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, just like a currency, right, to basically conduct our affairs, right? Whereas, from the sounds of it, it seems like, it's more of a investment, right? And then you need to be really aware of it, before you get into it, right? And because I'm just looking at the volatility, right? If I look at the volatility chart, it just makes no sense to me, right? And I don't have an economics background, but I do have a somewhat, finance background, right? And I'm trying to make sense out of the chart. The volatility of the price just within, a few months, it's just really complicated, right? And I think, it's really for the sophisticated users, to kind of get into this. So not so much for the average people, right? So I think that kind of leads to how it's just for the exclusive club, some sophisticated users who know the structure of the Bitcoin and how it really works, and they have done a lot of research on this topic, before they get involved. And even then, today's 40,000, within a couple hours, it may drop to 25,000. So if I've transacted, let's say, if I'm trying to raise $1 million to build a masjid somewhere, right? And I need, let's say, 50 Bitcoins to do that, right? So my crowdsource funding for 1 million, don't you think it's like continuously changing depending on the value of the Bitcoin? Whereas currency itself is much paper currency, although it's has many flaws and everything else. But US dollars, as an example, is much more stable because it's a medium of exchange. So if I'm using US dollars and converting them to UAE into dirhams, right? The exchange rate, right? It's relatively stable, and maybe with a deviation percentage of less than even 0.05, right, on daily basis, right? Even without even taking into consideration the aggregate. So how do you deal with that?
There's many ways to deal with that. It's just when it comes down to it, Bitcoin is a currency. I don't know if you call it a currency. Bitcoin's value is volatile but consistently goes up, whereas the value of paper currencies like dollars is relatively stable but consistently goes down. And if you ask people, what would you prefer? Something which is stable but loses value, or something unstable but increases in value? And there's it's not that difficult to understand. And that's why you see a lot of people like Zimbabwe. I don't know if you heard of Zimbabwe, but Bitcoin use has become very common in Zimbabwe because, that's an extreme example of a failed paper currency where they had $1 trillion, $100 trillion notes. And
Yeah.
Venezuela is another example. Where it's become very popular now. And also, so there's countries all over the place that are adopting this because they see it as a way of protecting their wealth. And as for the gold, for example, when the price of gold goes up, people can go out in the mountains and mine gold, which was more difficult. It was not profitable to mine before, but when the price goes up, suddenly it is profitable, right? So then the balance it can kind of balance it out in terms of price, more onto the market. And that kind of ties into the hadith, the point about the hadith about this, which there's a hadith where someone asked the Prophet ﷺ to fix the price of grain. And his reply was, it's Allah who sets the prices. Right? So and this is taken as evidence by some against price controls by the government. And that's why I think that really ideally the best Islamic currency is something that is a real commodity, which is tied to some kind of real production and has intrinsic value. That is the ideal medium of exchange. But in terms of if you want to use Bitcoin and dealing with the volatility, there are ways to insulate yourself. If you don't want to be exposed to the volatility, then there are ways to transact very quickly and make almost instantaneous transfers so that you really minimize your risk of getting caught by a fluctuation. But I've never had a problem with it because I've lost money making purchases before, but I've also I've also had the value go up. And over a long enough
I hope
time
you
span,
had few
it
Bitcoins
tends to
just
average
a few
out in
months
your favor.
ago.
Oh,
Sorry,
just a few minutes ago? What do you mean?
No, I said I hope you had few Bitcoins in your possession a few months ago because how the price just went up, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have very little. I'm not going to talk about. I don't have very many Bitcoin at this point. I do have some, but I don't want to talk about how much, like my exact holdings or something. But
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, since I learned about it, I've basically kept all of my savings in Bitcoin. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I don't have much left of this. Yeah.
So obviously, brother, you would obviously agree that in an Islamic system there is the set way of money, the means of exchange is you have gold and silver, and it's commodity based, right? And you're saying is that it would be left to the scholars if they want to also include Bitcoin if we're still in the internet age, when inshallah the Islamic system emerges, and you'd be for it, I guess. Is that true? Is it right to say, or?
I mean, I'm for whatever advances the purposes of the Sharia. Like that's, if it's going to bring benefit to the Muslims, and it's going to help to establish Islam, then yeah, I'm going to support it. And I do feel that Bitcoin has a lot of those properties. A lot of what Bitcoin does, I think it opens possibilities for the Muslims and for establishing Islam. In many ways, and I can't go into all of them. I'm trying to go into some of them now, but that's the type of stuff that. And this book, I wrote this book like 2 years ago, and a bunch of new stuff has occurred to me since then. So there's lots of possibilities. Is what I'm saying, and I can't necessarily go into them all right now. But it's just the status quo is kind of getting disrupted, and and that is going to open up these spaces. Right. And I really hope that the Muslims will be prepared to fill these gaps that, when this starts to kind of break apart. And I think that really, I do think that investing in Bitcoin does position you advantageously in terms of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good. Ali, you have any?
No, I mean, I think that was a really good explanation of it as well. I do see. I mean, there's a potential in it, right? But at the same time, the Islamic side of it, right? I'm still a little bit, I need to probably do a little bit more research on it, and I'm sure the viewers feel the same way as well, because the volatility is really the issue here, and plus. Not really knowing. I think it just came out now, a few days ago, that who really actually initiated this, the Bitcoin, right? It was supposed to be the Japanese name. I think it was a pseudo name being used. Now it seems like it's an Australian entrepreneur who.
No.
I'm forgetting his last name. No, that's not true.
No, this is a fraud. Craig, yes, right. No, he's been proven to be a fraud multiple times, and he just keeps going. Yeah, no, he's a fraud.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So do we know? Do we have where it originated? Because there's a theory out there. I don't want to call it a conspiracy theory, but there's a theory out there that CIA also has a hand in it. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Yeah, no, my favorite conspiracy theory about Bitcoin is that Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin, is the Dajjal. And that, that the currency system is going to collapse, right? Because the inventor, he has like 1 million Bitcoin, which is worth, I don't know how many billions of dollars now, but like $40 billion worth of Bitcoin. So the theory is that the value of Bitcoin will keep going up, and the currency systems of the earth will all collapse. And then he will emerge, Satoshi Nakamoto will emerge and say, hey, I'm here to save everyone and solve all the problems. And I have this huge fortune of Bitcoin. And that, he's going to develop machines that make it rain at a time of drought. And yeah.
That makes a good script though. That makes a good script.
Yeah, that's why I like it, but I don't think that it's I don't think that's the reality. No.
But do you believe that it's important for us, especially for Muslims, to know the origin of it, or that's irrelevant? What's your take on that?
I the origin is very transparent. The origin is very transparent. It's just yeah, it's an open source software project, so you can see. There were many privacy technologies that were developed by the government. Also, I mean, the internet itself was originally a military, developed first by the U.S. military, and then transferred over to civilian purposes. The cryptography system that Bitcoin is based on was military cryptography for encoding military communications. So a lot of U.S. government developed technologies went into making it, but it is an open source software project, so everything about it is very transparent, and it's understandable that whoever developed it didn't want his identity to be known, because he would be in serious trouble now if he did. And others had tried to develop currencies before and had been arrested and had huge legal problems and had their offices shut down. And
what about hacking? I mean, wasn't there some hacking done as well?
There's never been hacking of Bitcoin itself, but every single website or every single program that uses Bitcoin, that interacts with Bitcoin, can be hacked. And many of them have been. Yeah, so it's very, if you use it, you do have to take some responsibility for yourself. You have to know about issues of security, and even people who are quite knowledgeable about it, especially if they're a high value target, if they have a lot of money, then they can still end up getting targeted in hacks. Yeah.
Interesting.
So I just want to, before we kind of end it off, I want to just get a little better understanding of, like, say this Japanese person who invented this Bitcoin currency. Like, what I obviously the viewers can refer to your book, but if you can in a nutshell tell me, obviously you're saying that this has Bitcoin currency has intrinsic value. How was it determined that there'll be a certain amount of Bitcoin currency and which people can trade freely? Like, how did that come about?
The reason I say it has intrinsic value is because you could have a company like Western Union that deals in the transfer of money, right? And that company, let's say that's pretty much all they do, is they allow people in different parts of the world to securely transfer money to each other.
Yeah.
And they take a fee for that, they make a profit from it. And their company has value because they have, computers that provide that service, they have offices, they have staff, procedures, all of that has value. So when you have Bitcoin, it's like and that's why I say it's not really a currency, and it's not really an asset like a stock or something like that. It's something that's in between. So when you own Bitcoin, you own a stake in the network. You're investing in the network itself. And based on the success of the network,
I see. Okay.
Investment will go up and down, just like a stock, right? But it also gives you the right, like owning Bitcoin is the only way that you have the right to use the Bitcoin network. So
I see.
It's also the key to accessing that network, which has a kind of value in itself, even though it's not a centralized organization.
I understand. So it's an investment and money at the same time, you're saying? It's an investment and a means of exchange at the same time.
Well, yeah,
right.
Like, for example, in a way, like a lot of people, for example, in a lot of Muslim countries, they'll buy dollars, right? And they'll buy dollars because the currencies tend to be less stable in a lot of Muslim countries. They have higher inflation, so it loses value more quickly. So they say, well, I'm not going to keep my money in the local currency. I want to keep it in something more stable. So they'll invest in dollars. So that's like, it's a vote of confidence
in the US dollars currency. Yes, I understand.
Well,
yeah.
Or in the military power that backs it, in the political system and the economic system that backs it.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, thanks. Well, you know what? We are going to have you back on the show because me and Ali were also looking at your critique and articulation of the current passport system as well, which
yeah.
we're all subject to under the world secular system. And yeah, we really enjoyed that video of yours, and inshallah, we'll have you back on the show to talk on all these broader topics as well that's affecting the ummah,
Alhamdulillah.
and talk about how to best revive it. But Jazakallah khair for that, Brother Ibrahim.
وإياكم
Yeah.
وإياكم.
Ali, you have
Alhamdulillah.
any question further?
No, Jazakallah khair. I think that was very, enlightening. I'm sure, viewers will find that as well. It was a lot of information for us to absorb. And, we'll leave the links to your book as well. And also for the viewers, I mean, if you can support the brother through Amazon, buying his book, that would be appreciated. But he has also made it available for free for anybody to go out and download. And I think the book is definitely worth a read to get a better grasp and understanding on this complicated topic.
Yeah, and we also to the viewers, we also suggest check out his YouTube channel. He has some really few really thought-provoking videos as well, enlightening videos that you can check out as well. Well, thank you again, Brother Ibrahim. Thank you all for listening.
Okay, thanks for
Assalamu
having me
alaikum.
very much. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.